Absolutely.
Yeah. I know. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you be, to SalesTV.live, the place where we do have a guest with us today. We're hoping he turns up. So
Check the green room.
Perfect. So let's do a little round the room of intros. So I'll kick things off. My name's Alex, fondly known as the Bearded Sales Guy. Clockwise this time, Mr. Hughes.
My name's Tim Hughes. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite, and I'm famous for the fact that I've wrote the book Social Selling Techniques to Influence Buyers and Change Makers.
Andy.
I'm Andy Huff. I'm not famous in the same level of way Tim is, but I am better looking, and I'm a Cranfield University lecturer and the founder of the Institute of Sales Professionals. And
Yeah.
I'm really glad that you've not gone into the Jack and Ori kind of session that you did this morning, mate. Hello, listeners.
For you, Andy. For you.
Yeah.
I changed it up.
Through the square window.
Mr. Gray.
Hi, I'm Adam Gray. I'm co-founder of DLA Ignite, and I would just like to challenge what Andy said. He's not more handsome than Tim, but he is taller than Tim.
Slightly more overweight than Tim as well, if I'm being honest, but let's not go there.
Perhaps a vote from the audience about who's the best looking out of the two.
I like that. Audience participation with real impact.
Yeah. And Rob.
Hi, I'm Rob Durant, founder of Flywheel Results, and I'm not famous for anything yet.
And to be fair, that court case came pretty close.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So, do we have our guest with us?
Yes.
So, without further ado, shall we bring him on?
And here he is. Oh, there we go.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, Matt.
Welcome.
Hey, how are you guys doing? Great to be with you.
Very good. Nice to meet you.
Are we all going to do the...
Oh, what, the...
My Kindle's in the other room.
Oh, Adam. Adam, we rehearsed this.
Oh, it's that, Matt. I thought it was another... Right, sorry. Sorry.
So, yeah, Matt, we like to have a little bit of fun on this show, as you can probably tell. Welcome. It's great to have you.
Yeah, great to be here.
Brilliant. Well, I don't think we should assume that everybody in sales knows you, although I do, you know, someone that's been in sales for many years thinks that everyone does, but that's not the case. So why don't you take a few minutes to introduce yourself and give us some background?
Yeah, sure. Well, first, thanks guys for having me. This is a fun format, and I could tell from the introductions there's a bit of fun in store for this conversation too. So I'm looking forward to that. So Matt Dixon, I am a co-founder of a company called DCM Insights. We are primarily a research organization, really researching changes in customer buying behavior and what the best commercial teams are doing to adapt to those changes. We then take our research, we put it into books and articles, a variety of formats, and we have a number of training programs that we offer around some of that IP. Prior to this company, which I co-founded in January of last year, I'd spent most of my career at a company called CEB, which was acquired by Gartner Group back in 2017, where we put out a bunch of IP, including the Challenger Sale, the Effortless Experience, Challenger Customer, were some of the books that people might be familiar with. But it's funny because I struggle to explain what I do for a living to my own parents, and the best they know I live in Washington. I have a confusing job, so they assume I'm a spy, which is not the case. So I think somebody called me a sales anthropologist, which I think is a pretty good description. I'm a researcher by trade and try to apply those research techniques and methods to studying sales, as well as customer experience and customer service. So I think I bring a bit of a different angle. I'm not a sales professional or sales leader in terms of my background, more of a researcher. So anyway, it's great to be with you guys.
Brilliant. So who wants to go first with the questions? I have a couple prepared.
Go for it, Alex.
So one question I've got for you, Matt. So there's Challenger. You mentioned Challenger.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a fan. I practiced Challenger for many years. I'd like to think I was pretty good at it, but I could always be better. It was interesting when the Challenger Customer came out. It was a moment that I thought, well, okay, these guys have admitted they made a mistake or they missed something. So with the JOLT effect in mind, what is the one thing that you think might be missing or needs to be tackled?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I Brent Adamson, who was my co-author on two of the books on Challenger and Challenger Customer, he was always famous for saying, as researchers, we uncover answers, but in the process, we actually discover more questions that we didn't answer. So, I think you said it quite well, Alex. Challenger was a story of how do we engage customers who are increasingly learning on their own? They're boxing us out. They're making their minds up themselves about what they need, how you as a vendor or supplier could help them on their journey. And then they're forcing you to compete on price against your competitors. And so how do we engage that kind of customer? But one of the things we found, and what our early readers and consumers of that research told us, that this is all well and good, but what we're seeing out in the market, especially when it comes to selling complex B2B solutions, this is not the story of just, you need to have a great first sales meeting, but this is more about navigating a multi-threaded sale, a consensus buying environment where there are lots of stakeholders at the table. And so what do the best salespeople do to deal with that, right? Because there are a lot of great first sales meetings that die in committee once they get to that buying committee. So that was really the genesis of the Challenger Customer. And then, the JOLT effect is, for those listeners who are not familiar, or those viewers who are not familiar, deals with this problem of customer indecision, or in salesperson's terms, the no decision loss, and what drives that, and what the best salespeople do to avoid it. This was something that we had been tracking for a while. And again, it came from sales leaders around the world, many of whom were very familiar with Challenger and Challenger Customer. And they would tell us, we've still got this problem where we're coming in, we're challenging the customer's thinking, we are finding our mobilizer, is the concept we talk about in the Challenger Customer. We're building that consensus. They're telling us they want to work with us. In fact, they're saying, stop selling to us. We're sold. We're good. Let's move forward. And then they're kind of veering off into this wasteland of no decision. They start ghosting us. They start going radio silent. They stop replying to our emails. And the techniques that we're using to try to get them to reengage actually seem to make things worse, not better. So what's going on? And so it felt like our answer set was incomplete. I think if I to your question, there are things that I'm kind of I've always been intellectually curious about. One of which we just completed a large study on. The one area of sales I felt like that the prior work didn't really adequately cover is professional services. So this is a very different sales model, as you guys know very well. It is a model in which one's product is oneself, right? It's your own advice, it's your own advisory capabilities, whether you're a lawyer, you're a sales trainer, you're a consultant, you are an investment banker, an accountant. You're not selling a physical product, you're really selling yourself. And it's from a go-to-market standpoint, it's a very different model, because it's one in which you're both selling and delivering the work, which is quite different. And the added complication is that, nobody went to law school to become a salesperson. They went to law school to practice law, but when they make partner in their firm, they're expected to produce business, not just execute on it. So all of those things make it an interesting kind of niche in the sales world, which is actually quite a big one when you look at the number of people who are in that industry. And so we actually just completed a large-scale global study of top rainmakers, if you will, in the professional services world, which revealed some very interesting answers. That was something that I was personally interested in, mainly because I probably had my rear end handed to me one too many times presenting Challenger and other content at partner retreats for professional services firms. I realized, okay, what you guys do is actually different. And so we did a different study there. I think obviously, I don't want to add to the amount of ink that's been spilt about Gen AI and the impact it's going to have on every industry, not least of which is sales. But I do think there's going to be some really interesting work to be done over the next few years, looking at how best organizations are leveraging that technology, which has a lot of promise, but unproven promise, I think. And there's a lot of fear out there around what this means for sales professionals and for customers alike. And so I think that's going to be an area of that, I'd like to monitor and stay close to and see how it evolves. I think the questions that will come up will be as people start to consume the JOLT effect and they start to put in place some of those practices. I think that's where some of the new questions will be revealed and some of the shortcomings, and people come back and say, hey, did you ever think about this? Or here's the new problem we're encountering. So we've got our ears sort of dialed in, waiting for that feedback from the market. So,
yeah.
Well, when I read the book, Matt, I must admit, I always approach reading books quite cynically. And because I've just read an article from Marketing Profs where there's the classic research piece that says we talked to 250 people because that's
right.
what PR says you need to do, is talk to 200. That's the sample. And I know that we've talked about this. Andy, being an academic and works with academics, knows about sample size. Mm. So on page 5, you talk about a sample size of 2.5 million.
Yeah. I didn't listen to all those calls myself. That would so, but yeah, it's interesting, Tim. So we were the beneficiaries. I think. Look, everybody I think looks back on March of 2020 with very mixed emotions, and obviously a very topsy-turvy time in every industry in everybody's life. Right? We all remember this very well. But in sales, it was a very unique moment in time where I would argue sales before March of 2020 was on a slow march to become more virtual. So, we go back 5 years. So 2015, there were a lot of sales interactions happening on virtual platforms, on Zoom and WebEx and Teams, and probably a lot of platforms like Blue Jeans and things that don't exist anymore. Skype for Business, anybody, things like that. And then, fast forward coming up to 2020, more and more companies were doing more of their selling over virtual platforms. But in March of 2020, in the span of about a week, the entire sales world flipped to virtual overnight. So that meant that not just the mundane sales interactions, but the really critical ones as well. Negotiation conversations, critical consensus building meetings, senior level discussions were no longer happening in the client's office because you weren't allowed in the client's office, and your own company was letting you travel anyway. You didn't want to, so it all happened on Zoom. So we decided this was a golden opportunity, because we're huge nerds, that to do a new kind of sales study. I think we say in the beginning of the book, we'd always been, of course, fans of Professor Rackham's groundbreaking work in spin selling. And I just could never find anybody willing to foot the bill for that kind of research project where, Neil and his team traveled around the world, physically sat in on 30,000 plus sales interactions. It was a big team. It was a very expensive undertaking, took a long time. But modern technology allowed us to do something very similar, which is use conversation intelligence. So transcription engines and machine learning based analysis. So we recruited several dozen companies, collected 2.5 million sales calls, and then studied them at scale. We took all that unstructured audio, turned it into unstructured text, and then brought structure to it using a machine learning platform at a company called Tether. We studied 8,300 variables all told. And so it was a big undertaking, again, made possible by the pandemic and advances in modern technology that allowed us to study that kind of data set at scale.
You just started me to have a cold sweat. I'm at Canfield, and it's just like I did coding on NVivo. Matt, you probably know NVivo. It's a technical thing that allows you to do qualitative analysis, and it's just like, who's the poor sod that actually had to do the coding for all of that for you?
Yeah.
They're probably rocking backwards and forwards, and every time they hear your name, going, "No, don't let him back in the room."
I mean, it was it's interesting. It's a little bit like from a research standpoint, we've seen this kind of Moore's law of research productivity, or what's possible. So go back to again, Neil and team's work. I can't remember how big his team was, but I think it was 10 to 12 people. It was about a 10-year undertaking, 30,000 sales conversations with literally psychologists sitting in these meetings with taking notes and evaluating the interactions and scoring them, doing kind of qualitative scoring, as you said. Fast forward to Challenger and Challenger customer, we used more of a survey-based methodology, so much bigger sample. We collected the data in a much shorter period of time, but it was still pretty intensive. I mean, it took us several years to come up with that insight, a team of probably 20 or 30 people who were involved at different points in that project. And in a sample size that was bigger than Rackham's, but not in the millions for sure. And you fast forward to the JOLT Effect. Challenger came out, I think, in 2011. Challenger customers 2015. JOLT Effect is 2022. And just in that period of time, that study was done by myself, my co-author Ted McKenna, and our data scientist at Tether, a guy named Tom Shepard. And it was really the three of us who took that on. So much smaller team, much bigger sample, much shorter period of time. I don't know what comes next, right? I'm excited to see what comes next. Our research was done pre-Gen AI, so I'm curious to see how that changes the game yet again in what's going to be possible. But I've always found sales to be such a fascinating area, and I think you guys can all attest to this. It's an area where there's so much data. And now increasingly so much unstructured data, like our call recordings and recorded sales conversations that we can rely on. There's a known outcome, unlike other areas like marketing and strategy and places where it's a little bit hard to pin down the known outcome or the dependent variable. That's not true in sales. And yet it's still a discipline where there's a lot of conventional wisdom and there's a lot of personal opinion. Those are all personal opinions, quite valuable, but there's, Professor Rackham, I remember him telling me that one of his greatest regrets is that there hadn't been more real, if you will, almost academic research, but large sample size, quantitative, qualitative research done in sales because there's so much data and there's so many unanswered questions. And so, we'll see how things evolve. I think as technology makes it easier to maybe do some of this research at scale, hopefully we'll see kind of a golden era of deeper sales understanding and real large data set based research.
Is that technology maybe a dual-edged sword, though? As consumers have more technology, more information, are they more pressured to come up with the perfect decision versus the just good enough purchase or just don't fail?
You're hitting on the core of the argument in the book. So it's so interesting, but just to back up, because again, I don't know how many viewers have read the book. I'm sure by the end of this, you're all going to go out and order it. But the JOLT Effect deals with this problem of no decision losses. So just in a nutshell, I think you guys know this. Tim certainly knows this, that if you let me go on, I'll go on for some time. So I'll try to keep this brief because it'll make it more entertaining television or sales television. But one of the things we found, which we're quite surprised by, is that, if you think about a customer who goes from their status quo to agreeing on a new way forward with a vendor as a partner, and then to a purchase decision. So it's a 3-act play: status quo, agreement on a vision, purchase decision. There's this point in sales conversations where things can go a bit awry on the salesperson. And it's often between the point where the customer says they're on board, but before the point where they sign the contract or they execute the DocuSign, they start to dredge up objections and concerns that the salesperson thought had been addressed long ago. And so salespeople, because they've been taught to believe that the only reason this is happening is the customer still is in love with their status quo, or they still don't want to change. They're content with good enough. And so they go back and they try to dial up the FOMO, right? That you're going to miss out on these benefits. You're going to miss out on solving for this terrible status quo. Or maybe they just dangle that 10% discount in front of them. You're going to miss out on this great savings I can offer you now. Or in certain
offer a pilot or a proof of concept.
Pilot, that's right. In certain industries, it could be, and especially over the last couple of years, shortages of inventory, things like that. So we can create that urgency driver, right? These are all FOMO-based reasons to get the customer to move forward. And what we found is for customers who stated their intent to move forward, who agrees on the salesperson's vision, and then hesitates, dialing up the FOMO actually makes things worse. It doesn't make things better. This is a bit of a head scratcher to us. So we went back into the data. We actually asked a slightly different question, which is, why do customers make no decision at all? And it turns out there are 2 reasons customers make no decision. Salespeople believe there's only one, which is they still prefer the status quo. So it's a value question or an urgency question, right? But it turns out that is a reason, but it's only 44% of the time that happens. 56% of the time, It's the customer who is if you will, bought in with the need to leave the status quo, but they become indecisive for other reasons, and it's primarily their fear of failure. So what takes hold of them is not status quo bias, but what psychologists call the omission bias, which is basically their desire to avoid being personally culpable and make a mistake, right? This is where we on LinkedIn and other places we talk about the difference between FOMO, fear of missing out, and FOMO, which is the fear of messing up. And it turns out the omission bias for the customer is a more powerful psychological effect. Yes, we've got to win the battle for overcoming indifference. We've got to answer the why change question. We got to do the challenger thing, or whatever our approach is. No, methodology agnostic. We need a playbook for beating back customer indifference towards changing, because customers will, left to their own devices, they'll revert back to the status quo because change is hard, it's risky, etc. And so we've got to answer the why change question. But the second battle is to overcome their fear of messing up. And I think your question cuts right to the heart of that, actually, because one of the things that people get really worried about messing up is choosing the wrong thing. It's not having done enough research, or it's not getting what they're paying for. So we talk about choice overload, information overload, and expectations overload. And I think technology, to your point, is one of those. Think about Gen AI is a great example. It's such a rapidly moving space. There are so many different ways. If you just think about this from a head of sales or head of sales enablement perspective, there's so many different use cases within sales alone that you could deploy this technology. It's changing so fast, and nobody who's buying it is an expert in it. We barely understand how it works. We've messed around with ChatGPT, but we're not 100% sure how this stuff really works. And there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear that I don't know if I deployed this in the right way against the right use case. Should I use it to automate note taking for my salespeople? Should I use it to help with pre-call prep? Should I use it to spot deals that might be lost to no decision? To create customized solutions for my customers? There are lots of ways you could deploy it, but what's the best way to deploy it? Second, there's new information coming out every single day about this technology. You blink and the whole world has changed, and there's a new body of content that you can consume to become an expert on something like Gen AI. And you're never going to really be an expert on that because you're a sales leader. You've got a day job, and it's not to be an AI specialist. And then the last thing is, especially in this environment, I think your point is spot on. There's this fear that if I wait a little bit longer, I might figure out what the right use case is, exactly who the right vendor is, the perfect technology for me. Because what people really want to avoid right now, especially after the hangover of the last few years, is buying shelfware or buying technology that doesn't pay off. I don't know that we're ever going back to the world in which companies just bought seat licenses willy-nilly, hoping that these technologies would make their salespeople more productive. There's really been a reckoning. I mean, ask any SaaS player in the sales tech space, and they'll tell you it's really, really hard to keep customers. It's really, really hard to avoid contraction right now. And that's because there was a lot of over-promising and under-delivering. Probably blame to go around both the customer and the supplier in those cases, but I don't think we're going back to that world. And so people are very, very risk averse to putting their badge on the table and lobbying for something like a Gen AI solution they don't really understand. It's fast moving. They don't really know if it's going to pay off. They don't want their name associated with a big decision like that. So I think you hit the nail on the head.
It isn't another issue that in such a fast-paced environment, if I wait another month, there'll be a new product that'll come out, which will make the product I was about to sign yesterday obsolete.
Yeah,
it's really interesting that one of the foci of the book is customer indecision and helping customers to overcome that. Because I remember that we were first introduced to you with the work that you did at CEB and the 57% of the way through the buying journey, but more importantly, the complexity of the buying team. As the buying team gets bigger, yes, you get more and more decision makers, but the key thing for many of the conversations that we have is that when you get more than 5, I think, players, there's only a 30% chance of the deal actually happening. So you've got 70% indecision for whatever reason, and it could be fear, or it could be. So I guess is this just a perennial problem with complex purchases? Because that was 15 years ago, or whatever it was, and actually we're in the same situation now. Not that it was your job to solve that situation, but what's being reflected back, the environment's a very different place. But the outcome of that is still that people sit on their hands because they're scared to make that decision and make the purchase.
Yeah, I think in many respects, there's this tension out there in sales where every vendor and supplier, and you guys have been talking, we've all been talking about this forever, is how do we shift from selling products to selling solutions, right? And we know as vendors and as suppliers that a solution sale is better. It's bigger contract value. It's stickier, right? It really embeds in the customer organization. It's a longer contract typically. It's harder to dislodge. It's more profitable for us. But it has this dark side to it too, which is it's much harder to buy. It's much harder to evaluate. It's much more risky for the customer. And so in some ways, I think that's something that's never going to go away, unless we want to revert back to the world of selling in simple transactional kind of product ways, which might be less risky, but certainly is not the significant contract value we're looking for. It's not as sticky. It's not as long lasting a relationship. So I think there are dark sides to this journey that we're on, but there are answers out there. There are companies that have salespeople have figured out. Look, if you're evaluating a solution, I think the three big challenges, no pun intended, but the three big obstacles, if you will, that the salesperson is going to face is one, when it's a transformational purchase, it's a significant purchase, customers will do more research on their own before they engage you, because this is something that, there's a lot at stake. There's a lot of information to consume. They will do a lot of their own due diligence, and that's fine, except for the fact that it puts you in a place as a salesperson where the customer's made a lot of assumptions. They've cemented their mental model about what they think they need, how they think you fit in, what value you can deliver. And many of the things, as we all know, that customers have assumed or learned on their own are actually wrong. And so it puts a salesperson in a really tough spot to be seen as in a box with your competitors and really basically forced to compete on price. Because at that point, at 57% of the way through the sale, the customer's mind shifts from who's best to really who's cheapest. The second big obstacle is that consensus-based purchase. As risk and disruption goes up, as we go from buying a product to buying a solution, that's a buying committee consideration. That's not an individual buyer consideration. I would actually argue that problem is getting worse in large part because of the pandemic. I think Zoom has become the particle accelerator of buying committee growth, because there's no downside to a customer inviting everybody to sit in on the demo. One of the companies I worked at a few years ago, we did a demo with a bank. There were 130 people on the demo, most of whom we had no idea who they are. But you could count them, and you could add the amount of sales cycle time and lower the probability that we would get any answer whatsoever. And it turns out we didn't even get a yes, or they just went dark on us. They disappeared into the ether. But that's a problem, especially as we move from simple transactional product sales to risky, disruptive solution sales. And then the third one is the increase in the probability that the deal will end up going nowhere, despite all the hard work you've done to win over the customer, to prove the ROI and the value, to make it feel like a priority, to dial up the FUD and show them the cost of inaction. Even then, that deal is likely to end up in no decision. And a lot of that has to do with environmental factors right now. The hangover of new seat licenses and over-promising and delivering we've seen over the past few years. The current budgetary environment a lot of companies find themselves in, where there's just a lot of angst about putting your name against a complex solutions purchase that doesn't really pan out. That's shifted, I think, where it might have been something where you had egg on your face for lobbying for a purchase like that, to being something where you could get fired for lobbying for a purchase like that in today's environment. So it's quite risky. So I don't know if I really answered your question, but I think this journey, which I think is good for suppliers, does have some dark side to it that we've got to contend with. But fortunately, again, research helps us figure out the answers and what the best salespeople are doing to deal with some of those obstacles.
Yeah, and I guess you talk about the dark side, but part of the dark side is a rod that salespeople have made for their own back, isn't it?
For sure.
I'm selling a product. My product solves your problem, Matt.
Yeah.
And it doesn't. Of course, it doesn't.
Yeah.
How well you implement my thing is the thing that sorts your problem out.
Yeah.
So consequently, my solution is better than Tim's and better than Alex's, and it's the same price. Therefore, you should buy mine, and you buy it with this, as you said, that massive expectation,
Mm-hmm.
what happens is you get massive disappointment.
Yeah.
And that just makes the playing field more difficult for everybody that has something to sell, doesn't it?
Yeah, it makes it more difficult for all the people who come afterward too, right? So I think that's a real big part of the story here, guys, is that salespeople they're in a tough spot in general, because I think every customer out there has been burned in the past by suppliers who've overpromised, underdelivered, who've sold products where the TCO ends up being orders of magnitude higher than what was projected. And so customers have this bad taste in their mouths. I think they're jaded by if you will, the bobblehead routine that most salespeople run in sales calls, where they just say yes to anything the customer asks for. Yes, we can solve for that. Yes, we can integrate with this. Yes, we can, we've worked with companies like yours. And so I think that works against salespeople. And it's tough for the individual salesperson who's talking to a customer for the very first time. They've never met, but already from the moment the salesperson says hello, they are distrusted by the customer because of everything that's happened prior. The customers show up with a lot of baggage, I think. And so we found in the research, I think this is pretty interesting. It takes a lot of competence to do this, but the best salespeople are brutally honest and transparent. Todd Capone talks a lot about this, and I think he's right. Is that it takes guts to tell the customer, look, we'd love to work with you, but just to be very clear, our competitors actually do a much better job at that use case than we do. It's not where we specialize. We can address it, but we're not the best in the market. And so I'd be happy to introduce you to those folks, or to say, you know what, this is a new capability for us, and I don't want you to build your entire business case around it, because we're still trying to figure out the kinks and iron things out. I think that setting expectations, or for instance, you don't need the premium version of our product. The basic version is just fine for your needs. We can always grow into that later. I'd love to sell it to you, but I don't think it's the right answer. Or I know you want this all singing, all dancing $1 million solution, but I actually think we'd all be better off if we start a bit smaller. We'll get to that over time, but let's start here, experience some success together, learn some lessons, and then expand from there. It's easier for you to get approval for that, and it helps us learn how to work together. It's a smaller deal for me as a salesperson, but I think it takes a level of confidence, takes a level of empathy, I think, and it also is in recognition of just the environment that salespeople are dealing with, and this baggage that customers bring to the table whenever we interact with them.
I think it's slightly deeper than that, Matt. I think employers use sales teams clearly to hit a number.
Yeah.
But they don't even trust their own sales teams. So if you're the buying team within customer A, you don't even trust your own sales team.
Isn't that interesting?
So you're never going to trust the sales team from company B, C, D, or E who are in the supply chain. And that comes down to a passion of mine is we're not a profession, we're a vocation. So a doctor, the things that you just said, or an accountant, or somebody that we seek out in our personal consumer lives has those conversations. You know what, Matt? Yeah, you've got diabetes, so we could do these things. Yeah, we could give you a complete liver transplant, but actually, let's just start on some pills and let's just get your weight down and do things like that. That's not what we do. And I think what's the interesting tax is, it's the organizational leadership that sets salespeople up to fail. They don't get seen as a professional. They get seen as someone who ran the target down and ran their solution down. But all the things you just said are organizational cultures that need to be in place to say, actually, I want you to go and do this. And I love the whole Simon Sinek sales is like dating thing.
Yeah.
Because it basically says, shouldn't we be showing up in a different way? You know what? Here's my ethical exam I know how to behave with you. And here's my standards that I align to. And by the way, here's some interesting things that my customers have actually said about me, authentically measured by my outside organization. And those are there, but we don't want salespeople to be worried about that, because actually they're not around long enough for us to even bother worried about that, because they're normally gone in 2 years. So, and so actually there's this thing that I loved about your books, all of them, because they actually have been an evolution. The only thing I'd say about the Challenger sale, and I was at EMC at the time, I'm sure it's like we had to wind people back from being a challenger after the big strategic deal. You're just operational now. Why are you challenging over this upgrade? So, you want me to be a challenger? No, we want you to just be operationally brilliant at this point.
Yeah.
The whole point about the buying cycle and then the whole thing that then numbers and then what JOLT followed up on is great. And actually, in the academic circles, there's about 200 sales academics around the world.
Yeah.
There's not many of us. And the big problem is practitioners don't want to look at that. Tim said, 250 samples is nowhere near your sample size. And when we walk around, obviously, and talk about the JOLT effect in academic circles, everyone just goes, that's a proper piece of research. But you've had to put it in 3 books to get it anywhere near practitioners.
Right.
And that's that point, isn't it? Which is most of this wisdom doesn't get out there. So if you look at you look at Amy C. Edmondson down at Harvard, looking at, the Fearless organization, you look at Sean Aker, academia is completely changing, and you're changing it to the hope to say to people, you know what, it is data backed, it's a science, but the only way you're going to read it is if it's in this book, and if we do an Audible for you to read it and make it even easier for you to do it in 6 hours. So I think the stuff you're doing is absolutely fantastic, but I think organizations need to shift now and change the way that they think about, is it a profession or is it a vocation?
Yeah, it's a really great point. A number of points in there, I think, just on that, the profession, vocation. We did some interviews with some of the folks we identified through the research and went back to their companies and said, this person really seems to be exhibiting a lot of these JOLT behaviors that we identified in the research. Would you make an introduction? Could we sit down with them for a behavioral interview? And so we did a number of those. And we heard, it was interesting. I remember from a few salespeople actually at different companies. Back to your point earlier, they would talk about this idea of, and this is the point you made about the advice we get and the guidance we get from folks in our personal lives that we don't really feel like we get from salespeople, nor do we think our own salespeople are delivering to our customers, nor do we necessarily want them delivering that to our customers, which I think is a very is a deeper source of, like, if you will, nefariousness that's going on here. But I think that some of these salespeople said, I try to imagine what I would tell my best friend who was evaluating this solution. Would I lead them down the primrose path around capabilities I know we're actually not very good at delivering? Would I sell them more than they need? Would I overpromise and underdeliver? And it creates a really different dynamic. And that's a simple kind of concept, but I think it's telling. And I think most salespeople wouldn't necessarily think that way. We know most salespeople wouldn't think that way. Then I think you're on the point about the research in bridging that gap from, if you will, academic research to practical application. I think that's always been the really hard thing, actually, is how do you take research and data and science and then put it into the form of a story that people want to, that's engaging and people want to consume it, and then they want to do something about it. That's always been the really hard piece, because I think there's actually there's not enough of it. I think, to your point, there are not enough people doing research on sales, but there is some really great research being done. And I think a lot of it ends up, where a lot of academic research does, which is it stays in academia, but it doesn't ever cross that divide to become something that changes the way people sell and the way teams are managed and run. But it's, how do we take that great insight and then make it resonate and get people to want to do something about it, which is always the trick, right?
Yeah. I think Sean Aker said, if the average academic paper is read by 7 people and one of those is your mum.
My mom hasn't even. I'm 100% sure that there's a stack of books. There's a red one and a light blue one and a yellow one. Now they're holding her door open that she's not ready to.
So in the book, Matt, you talk about the buyer's agent being a buyer's agent. Is that what you're talking about now?
It's really good. It's a really good touch point there, Tim, because I think that is what we're talking about. It is fundamentally, I think you guys mentioned, it is about empathy, ultimately about seeing yourself as somebody who is here to help the customer make a hard decision, a hard choice about what should be and what should they say yes to, what should they say no to, what's nice to have, what's need to have. Instill the confidence that they don't have to consume all the content out there, because I'm here to help them make the right call for them and their organization. I can be trusted to be brutally honest about what they should say yes to and the things they actually should pass on and the things maybe we're not so great at. And I'm going to instill a safety. I'm going to set proper expectations, not outlandish, gaudy ROI projections, but rather achievable outcomes. And I'm going to lay out a roadmap and a game plan for achieving those. That is ultimately about being more helpful, right? And being more a guide and a person who's there to help a customer through something that actually can be one of the most difficult things in their career. Think about, especially in this environment, a customer lobbying for a big expenditure with a vendor and running point on that and putting their badge on the table and saying, we've got to go in this direction, is a really, really, emotional and scary thing, even for very senior executives. And so I think thinking of yourself less as a salesperson, more as a buyer's agent, is a good mindset. I'm here to be helpful to you. Whether the answer ultimately is to buy from us or not buy from us, or may buy from a competitor, it doesn't matter, because my ultimate goal is to help you get to the right answer for you and your organization.
Yeah.
I think that's a great way of putting it. The slight issue is, again, how do we actually get addictive leadership? So most sales managers would unpick that by going, yeah. Now what's your number?
Yeah.
Some hope for the future.
As long as the answer is the biggest deal possible. Right?
Yeah.
Some hope for the future. I teach Intro to Marketing at Northeastern University. It just so happens the last class we were talking about cognitive dissonance, buyer's remorse.
Yeah.
And I asked the students, well, what can marketing do to help that? Thinking, after somebody buys, follow up with marketing that assures that the best answer was the simplest. Well, make sure the value promise in our original messaging meets what we can deliver. So the generation that's coming up gets it.
Yeah. I think that is hopeful, and I think I think that you're right, and I think that it's like deceptively simple. I think, and it's something I think we'd all agree to, and then I think, Andy, as you said, something that fortunately falls on deaf ears in a lot of organizations, but maybe that tolerance for overpromise and underdeliver, sell the whole kitchen sink, force customers into decisions that they're not completely convinced of our right answer for them. Hopefully that's an age we're moving out of, right? And as you said, Rob, is that the new generation's expecting something different when it comes to making decisions, especially risky, disruptive, transformational decisions.
It's not ethical and it's not purposeful, is it? And it's not sustainable, which are the things they live by.
Yeah. So we've got a few minutes left. Matt, what are the things that you would recommend to sales people watching this, that they can sort of practically take away and implement?
Yeah. So I'll share just one technique, and this might feel a little bit in the weeds. This is actually not in the book, which is I think for we've all had this experience where we've put piece of content out there, what's an article or book, and then we have that V8 moment, which I know I'm dating myself, but gosh, I wish we put that in there. So it was interesting. It has to do with judging the level of a customer's indecision. After we wrote the book, we actually went back into the data, and there's just there's a wealth of data that we had to work with. At some point, we had to kind of pull up and turn it into a story. But we did get a question from folks about how do we really assess how indecisive the customer is. And a lot of the book, as you guys will recall, we talk about judging indecision, comes down to kind of tuning our active listening to pick up on those signs of indecision, which is great. But what we also learned is that the higher you go in the organization, the higher you get to into the C-level senior decision makers, these folks play it very close to the vest. They're just as indecisive as anybody else, but they don't let on that they are. They don't like talking about fear of failure because they get paid to make the tough calls, right? They're the rational actors, but they're just as indecisive as anybody else. So we found a technique in the data which derives from submarine warfare. We call it pings and echoes. What high performers figured out is you don't ask somebody if they're worried about getting fired for buying your solution. It's not a great sales technique. You don't ask them if they consider themselves to be decisive or indecisive. Also not a great approach. What they try to do is articulate the fear they think the customer is struggling with, but in a way that doesn't out the customer or embarrass them, but gets it on the table so that it can be talked about. So, if I were selling maybe Alex a solution to you, and I said, Alex, we've done a few demos, we did a POC, we've had some great conversations. I think we're moving forward here. Everyone's excited. But I had this realization that if I asked you and the team to tell me what is, because you told me budgets are limited, you can't have everything we make, what's nice to have and what's need to have, you guys might actually struggle a bit with that decision. And just to rest assured, every customer we sell to at this point in the sale has a tough time making that call because it's a big decision, right? And budgets are always limited, and you got to make the right call. So help me out here. Do you guys know what you want? Do you know what is nice to have, what's need to have? If you don't, I'd love to be of service to you and guide you toward the answer, because I do have some opinions and some views based on our experience before about what would be best for you. And if that's not what you're struggling with, please help me out and set me straight. And then Alex might say, yeah, actually, honestly, everything you've shown us is great. We can't have it all. And we would be hard pressed to say what should go in and out of the proposal, so we could use some help. Or no, that's not it at all, Matt. We're actually not worried about that. Sorry, we were just being polite. There's some stuff you showed us we're not interested in at all. We're worried about the business case because we can't promise that kind of ROI to our CFO. We'll get laughed out of our office. So we need to set proper expectations here. But it's like a ping of sonar, and we're looking for the reflection to come back, right? Trying to articulate what we think the buyer's struggling with and get a response back.
Yeah, brilliant.
That's excellent, Matt. Thank you so much for that.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Matt Dixon, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you,
to
Matt.
all of our
Brilliant.
Great to be with you. Take care, guys.
Thank you.
With bonus content.
There we go.
bonus content.
Thanks, Matt.
Very good, guys. Take
Enjoy
care.
the rest of your week, folks. Take care.
Cheers. Bye.